Good evening, everyone. Welcome back. We are into part 7 now on the MiG-29 build. This is the Monogram 1-48 MiG-29. And this is the second attempt for me recording this audio, because the last string of audio, I went into the final review of it and noticed I was repeating myself quite a lot. I think I just got to the point of where I was rambling, so went ahead and deleted that, and we're going to do take 2 here. So part 7, we're going to do some final detail paint, and we're going to do some weathering. This is probably the kit that I've weathered the most. It came out all right as far as I'm concerned. I think it looks pleasing to my eye. Something I'm definitely working on, so this I think is a step in the right direction. So the first thing I'm doing is I am putting Alclad primer, the black paint, into the wheel wells. And the MiG-29 actually has a bare metal aluminum finish in the wheel well. So to achieve that finish, I'm going to use some of the aluminum Alclad spray or aluminum Alclad paint. All of this, all the Alclad products that I use spray directly from the airbrush. They do not need to be thinned. And overall, the finish comes out really well. I haven't checked the accuracy of the wheel wells for this kit versus the actual aircraft. I will say that I do like the way the wheel well is portrayed in this kit, specifically because they've got they've got some detail in there. There's some interesting features, and there's areas where I can go in and run some panel line accent to make it look weathered and dirty and relatively accurate to how the actual aircraft would look. Doing the nose was particularly tricky. You can start to see some of the design choices in these kits, right? Some of the aircraft designs have wheel wells that you have to install. This one did not. They actually came pre-molded into the assembly, and so I didn't have the choice to paint them out of the aircraft. Realistically, I think I'm starting to understand why some of the aircraft or the kit manufacturers do that. You think you would be able to get some better detail in there, but we're going to have to wait and see until I come across another one of those kits and start recording it. It's been a while since I've actually built one up with a separate landing gear wheel well. So here we're going to do the detail paint. I looked it up, and the MiG-29 actually does usually have yellow coated or painted hydraulic lines. I assume that the 2 canisters portrayed in this are meant to be accumulators. A little trivia for anybody: an accumulator is basically it's basically the equivalent of a battery for a hydraulic system. So you can store pressure, and that way, if the aircraft had a hydraulic failure, they would maintain hydraulic pressure to extend the landing gear, so that we can the pilot could attempt to land the aircraft. So that's what those were. I didn't actually find a picture that included a clear shot of an accumulator on the MiG-29, and I just chose red as a detail color. Again, I'm not going super accurate with this kit, and so I just wanted to give it a little bit of color, make it more interesting. Don't worry, in the next couple of kits, we're going pretty accurate. Once we have since we have all the decals on now, the next thing that needs to be done is we need to seal those decals into the paint stack up. So here you can see that I'm going back over it with clearly some kind of clear coat. I'm actually using the Pledge clear coat that I've previously discussed. We don't need to go glossy again at this point, really. I'm sealing them in so I can do weathering on top. That way, if I don't like the weathering, I can come back and remove it. The weathering paints I have essentially are all oil paints. They're a mix of Tamiya's panel line accent and ammo panel line accents and washes. They're all oil paints, so they can be thinned with enamel thinner. The clear coat I'm using here is not. It's impervious to the enamel thinner. It doesn't react with it. So that way, if I put on the weathering and I don't like it, I can essentially take some enamel thinner and I can take off any of the weathering that I've put on. It'll take a long time, and it may take a good amount of that thinner, but it can be taken off without affecting the underlying paint and without affecting the placement of all of the decals. And so that's why we go ahead and And that's why I'm going ahead and sealing it in now with some more of that floor gloss. So that being said, I think at this point you probably could go ahead and do like a flat clear, which will be our final clear. You'll see that later on in this episode. But I went ahead and just did another layer of gloss. It worked for what I needed, and it didn't prevent us from doing the flat clear later on. I think we still got a good covering with that, and it worked out. It worked out perfectly fine, honestly. While I'm doing that, let's talk a little bit more trivia. In a previous episode, I made some commentary about painting the aft protrusion there between where the engine exhaust would be. There's actually a speed brake on the MiG-29. The MiG-29 has a clamshell style speed brake where half of it extends up and half of it extends down. Similar to how the F-14's speed brake works. Aerodynamically, that's done so that you don't induce a pitching moment on the aircraft when your speed brake deploys. So that's what that is. And then also in a previous video, I made mention of some kind of line on the nose landing gear. That actually is a brake. So I think previously I thought it would likely be an electronic line or a line for a wiring harness. It actually is a hydraulic line. The MiG-29 does have a nose wheel brake. I'm assuming that's more for stopping the wheel after, or I guess before you retract the landing gear. So after takeoff, the wheel's spinning at whatever takeoff speed you have. And you want to stop that before it gets in the wheel well, otherwise it's going to sling around a bunch of dirt and debris, and it's energy that the aircraft doesn't need at that point. So get it stopped before it retracts and good to go. So I'm assuming that's what that's for. On the ground, with the aircraft being a tricycle landing gear configuration, I think it'd be a little unstable to use that brake, but I am not a pilot. I have never flown a MiG-29, and I've barely even seen one, so I'm by far not an expert. But on the subject of landing gear, I will say this kit, it does sit correctly on the tricycle landing gear, but I think it sits a little bit too correctly. And what I mean by that is, when landing gear designed, the main landing gear take most of the weight. And so the center of gravity is just in front of the main landing gear typically on an actual aircraft. That way the aircraft can rotate for takeoff. That's the point. This kit it does sit on all three landing gear, but it is a very shallow angle required to get it to tip up onto the tail. I don't think it's necessary to put a weight in the nose cone of the aircraft, but if you're placing it in an area where there is a slight incline, it's a good idea. I think, go ahead and throw a weight in the nose cone, and a standard fishing lead weight will do fine, and they'll just be able to make it a little bit more stable. And so I'm happy with the way it sits. I'm going to be displaying it flat. I should be displaying it flat, but fair warning, that's the risk we take with a lot of tricycle landing gear aircraft, and the fishing weight inclusion is the tool that we've come up with to combat that. So here you see we are starting with the Tamiya panel line accent. Since I rescribed the panel lines in this aircraft, and there's not a whole lot of detail in those panel lines, I essentially followed the lines that were already there in the Revell kit, but or I guess Monogram. I followed the raised lines that were already there, where I just sanded them down and then rescribed them as indented into the surface. There's not a whole lot of detail, so I eventually elected to go back and use one of the ammo blue-black panel line accents, where I just brush it on instead of using the really fine Tamiya brush. And what we're really working on here is getting it into all the crevices, all the cracks, and all the sharper angles, places that dirt would actually accumulate on an aircraft. And so, if you're doing this, and you're doing this for the first time, don't panic. Your model is going to look very dirty. It's going to look a little bit cumbersome, like you didn't know what you were doing at first. Like I didn't here with the focus, apparently. Don't worry about that. It's all correctable. As we said, we have sealed in all the decals. All the underlying paint is protected now by a clear coat. we can take all of that off if there's an issue, or I can take it all off, and if you're doing one of these models, you'd be able to as well. So don't panic if you're getting a little hesitant because they're making such a mess of your model. Don't worry about it. Just let it dry. So I believe I sat and let this dry for about 24 hours after I applied all of the panel line wash for the most part. The wheel wells, I did like the way the wheel wells stained up. There was enough features, or there were sufficient features in there that it really gave it some depth to have that shadow and that accent on there. Clearly here we're not done. There's quite a bit in the wheel well. Obviously there's a ton on the panel line. I am going to go back and fix that later. So yeah, continuing. We're just going for all the cracks. We want to run all the way down the inlets on the inside. We're running around the nose cone. There wasn't really a panel line there, and the actual, if you were to get a different manufacturer's kit, I think Great Wall makes a kit for the MiG-29 that's got a good bit more panel line accent, or panel line detail, excuse me. If you were to go after that kit, I think you'd find a good amount more surface detail to really push those washes into, and it'd make it look a bit more true to life. So make sure you don't forget the inlets, the actual underside inlets, and keep working it into all those angles, all those crevices where dirt would build up. This is a point where I would highly advise that if you're really focused around a true to scale, true to real life, you do a little bit extra research. I've mentioned previously I wanted to build this mostly out of the box. I wanted to build this with Ukrainian paint scheme, and I wanted to build it with Ukrainian decals. I mentioned in the previous episode that yes, this is done with Ukrainian decals. However, the Ukrainian decals are for a 2-seat MiG-29, so this, we're already into a little bit of a kit bash, and that's fine. That being said, it's still a good idea to go look at some source material. Go try find pictures of a MiG-29's main landing gear wheel well. Go try find a picture of what the MiG-29 looks like between the inlets, where the panel lines are. If you are rescribing panel lines to be true to accurate, a lot of the times you can find online, like, not really maps, but diagrams of the layout of the panel lines and any rivet lines. Depending on how popular an aircraft is, obviously rarer, more obscure aircraft, you're going to have a harder time, and they may not have the exact model of aircraft that you're looking for. For example, this being a single-seat MiG-29, you may find a 2-seat if you're looking, or vice versa. Depends. But if you're really pushing for the accuracy, go ahead and spend some time doing that. And I think that'll really help in panel rescribing if you're doing it. And later on, the more panel lines you have, the more weathering surface features you have to expose and really bring into the paint scheme. And I think that's the hurdle I'm trying to jump through next. I haven't built any really hyper detail kits on this channel yet. I don't actually think I've built many in general. It is a goal of mine. I think the next aircraft I want to do will definitely have that feature. I really hope you guys can't hear the cat scratching the scratching post behind me right now. I'm going to leave it in, but I'll be interested to listen to this audio back and see if I can hear that. But yeah, so the next kit I kind of want to step up a notch. And so on this channel, for the most part, I've done the A10 and I've done this MiG, both of which are Revell kits. And full fairness to Revell, they're both easier Revell kits. So I can sit here and I can complain as I have, essentially, about the raised panel lines, lack of detail, fit issues, but at the end of the day, these two kits have been the relatively cheap side, and I'm fully willing to pony up that and just say, that may be contributory to what I've been facing. And so I do have some of the higher skill level Revell kits to get to eventually, but they will not be the next aircraft. Let's just put it that way. I do have a 1-48 B-29 at some point, which is one of the Revell kits. It's skill level 5. And so I'm looking forward to getting to that, but I haven't taken much time to look at it, honestly. It may it may correct all the issues that I personally had with this kit. So back to the topic at hand, pull some reference detail and try to make it as accurate as possible. Depending on the environment that some of these aircraft are operating in, you're going to have different amounts of weathering. Obviously, wartime weathering is a lot more prevalent than peacetime weathering for those of you doing military aircraft. For those of you doing GA aircraft, this level of weathering is not usually a factor. GA pilots typically have the advantage of not having to go flying immediately. There's no requirement to go flying today if something's wrong. And so military aircraft typically have a lot heavier weathering. If you're doing a military aircraft that's in a rainy climate, remember that rain does carry dirt debris with it. You may have streaking going vertical down the airframe. I've seen quite a few pictures of that. I think I've even seen it in real life. So you'll start with dirt and debris collecting on the dorsal structure of the aircraft, or dorsal skins of the aircraft, and then it'll run down the sides of the aircraft as the rain pools and drips down. You also have cases of where you have like fluid leakages from the aircraft. You've got an oil leak or something, and the rain collects that and then drips it down the side and evaporates and leaves behind the streak of oil. So keep that in mind. As we go through the wings here, you'll notice I'm sweeping fore to aft, but also slightly outboard. This is to replicate airflow. So if we've got a leading edge flap that's got slight hydraulic leakage, or there's oil or some kind of grease that's pooling in there, it's going to attract dirt. If we get dust in the air or anything like that and the plane goes through it, it's going to cling onto that grease and oil and dirt. And so as the aircraft flies, that airflow is going to push that sediment and that grease back across the wing. And remember, this is a swept wing aircraft. So the airflow doesn't just go fore to aft. It will also start to divert a little bit to the outboard. I'd also point out this aircraft has a gun at the bottom of the screen right now. And you can see, you could see briefly, if I move my hand, you'll see I've got a little bit of streaking after where the gun is. That, in this case, is to replicate that the gun has been fired. So you've got some soot deposits from the gun blast diffuser. And so that's going to stain. It's not really a leading edge extension on the MiG-29. It's kind of like a chine, but it's not. It's just part of the body, I think. Maybe there is a term for that. That's some research for me to do later. But anyway, so that soot off the gun is going to cause some staining. So depending what model you build and how much you really want to get into the weathering, start to think of what's going to cause it. So landing gear wheel wells are going to be pretty gross because of the amount of hydraulic assemblies running through them for brakes and retraction, and there's actuators in there. You're also pulling up a wheel that's probably been run across a wet runway every now and then. And so that wet runway's got dirt, debris, sediment in it that gets kicked up onto the airframe. So behind the wheels and behind the landing gear wheel wells, you're also going to have, some of that splatter. I think I mentioned in a previous one that a lot of the MiG-29s have mud guards on the front landing gear. This kit didn't, interestingly enough. I considered 3D printing one, but ultimately decided against it. And I'm just going to leave it as it is. I think if I come back and do another one of these in the future, I'd definitely do that. I'd go back and probably put the mud guard on, just because I think it's a pretty cool feature. And I'd like to do it on the next one. But that's quite a while from now. So again, we're going to streak back and outboard on the stabilators, just to accomplish the same similar effect on the wings. I did get quite a lot more sooting or weathering to the stabilators than the wings. I like the way it came out. I think having a little bit more on the wings would have been a little more advantageous, but overall I was pretty happy with it. Again, this is one of the first times I'm doing this level of weathering staining, and so I didn't want to go too overboard, at least not in the first time. I think the next kit will be a different one. I'm actually going to try a couple of other techniques on the next kit. I'll talk about that in a second. I did promise the people that viewed in episode 6 that I would talk about the next project during this part. So we'll get there. But yeah, with this one being the first time I did this amount of weathering, I just wanted to be a little bit careful. And some of it I did do off camera even. At some point when we show the full underside of the aircraft towards the end of the video, you'll notice there's some brown staining on the aft end of the engine, and that's actually where the engine would be. And that's from a panel line wash I have from Ammo as well. That's a red-brown color. And that I did that off camera just because it's mostly the same thing. But also I didn't know how it was going to work. I'd not used it in that method before, and so I wanted to do that for myself, and that way I could remove it if I wanted it. Ultimately, it looked okay, so I left it. But you see that later. You will notice that I did just run across the nose landing gear wheel well. I left a pretty dark streak in the middle there. It looks like I think I come back and touch that up. I don't remember if I did it off camera or not. But yeah, overall I was pretty satisfied with that, or the dirt collection around the hydraulic lines and just some of the detail in there. I think it looked really good. I will say, and I actually said this on camera before I realized that I'd messed with my camera settings and turned off the microphone. Be careful wearing long sleeves doing this. You are working with oil paints. Oil paints don't like to come out of certain clothing. And so here I'm wearing a long sleeve. You know, if you're going to do that, be careful and make sure you don't rub your sleeve on it. I put a relatively concerted amount of effort into not doing that. And I did say it out loud while I was doing this. And yeah, there we go. There, I'm touching up the nose landing gear wheel well. But yeah, I did make a comment on that as I was doing it, and later came back and watched the footage, and I was like, wait a minute. I turned off the microphone. Speaking of cameras, I think the setup changed between episode 6 and 7. I did redo the bench a little bit. I cleaned it up and reoriented it, put some new lights in. Still working on it. I'm not fully happy with it yet. And the focusing issues on the camera are still a work in progress. I'm probably going to switch back to my GoPro instead of using my SLR for this, just because it's easier. It's got a bigger depth of field, and I think it shoots in 4K, but I don't know that I have the hard drive space to process that with 49 subscribers so far. But oh yeah, reminder, if you're enjoying this, please like and subscribe. It does help, and definitely helps me to know that there are people out there that this is reaching, and it may be helpful. So doing the landing gear. For weathering, remember, this is probably one of the dirtiest parts of an aircraft. It is constantly exposed to high-speed water containing all kinds of sediment, dirt, and debris every time it's in use, essentially. And you've got some, especially on Russian and Soviet derivative aircraft, you've got very high flotation tires, which is why the main landing gear wheels and tires on this aircraft are so large. You're going to kick up a lot of dirt and debris with those high flotation tires. So it's going to get dirty. So don't be afraid to make it look like it. I'm using the Tamiya panel line accents because the smaller brush gives a lot better control. And we're just trying to put small amounts of that panel line accent into all the nooks and crannies and crevices, and it really starts to bring out the depth on the landing gear here. If you're doing this, make sure you don't go overboard weathering the chrome surface of the piston at the bottom there. That goes through several seals as the gear compresses and extends for shock absorption. And so it would be, usually aircraft are relatively clean in that area just because they're constantly cycled through seals that are pretty tight fitting. So dirt and debris and whatnot get knocked off pretty consistently and pretty easily. Here you actually have a very good shot of that nose landing gear brake hydraulic line. And actually here is the red-brown panel line wash. I did go back and add it because it's more like dirt's been kicked up, and you can see a little bit of it already on this strut. Looks all right. Didn't have any problems with it. I think it looks pretty good. I will also add that the aircraft's actually finished now while I'm recording this commentary. It's on the bench behind me. There is one single part that I omitted that I have to go back and redo. Not redo, I have to paint it and install it. And so that's going to be what I do essentially as soon as I stop doing this video. Maybe. Because I also have part 8 filmed. So I may do that and just get that queued up for later. Haven't decided. Or I may start working on the next aircraft. Also haven't decided. That's a problem for like 5 minutes from now. Because we are getting carefully and gradually towards the end of this recording. I did hand brush the canopy, as you can see here. For those of you hand brushing, make sure you thin your paints. Otherwise, they're not going to come out looking similar to the rest of the aircraft. So I did go ahead and hand brushed where the canopy frame would be. For those of you doing this, there are maskings you can buy. So Eduard is a pretty big company for doing photo etch, which I don't think I've touched on this channel yet. I do have a couple of kits with photo etch, but I don't think either of them are on the next kit. I have to go back and double check that, so don't take my word for it. But Eduard also makes canopy maskings, and so you can get a precision cut piece of tape that's ready to go for your aircraft. All you have to do is put it on, and then you can airbrush. I didn't bother this time. I just hand brushed it. And what I'll usually do is I'll hand brush if I'm hand brushing. What I'll typically do is hand brush it on, and then if I don't get an exact straight edge, I take an airbrush needle and I turn it around so that I get the blunt end, and I'll just scrape at the paint carefully where the stray is from a straight line. That typically works. You may have to polish it, and I have actually polished the canopy at this point of the video. I show it again later in part. I'll show it in part 8 as well, because I do have it filmed. I just didn't think it was appropriate in this section. So just polished, but if you're polishing, make sure that you check the canopy in various lights, because I did, but I didn't catch some of the streaking left over until the canopy was glued down. And so the final canopy has some streaks on the inside, which don't look ideal. But at this point, it's going to be too hard to lift it off, and I'm just going to have to live with it. For the smaller heat-seeking missiles, they're going to have a seeker head. So a really nice way to get some detail here is to run the nose a little bit flatter with some sandpaper, paint on the rough color of the background of the seeker head that you want. In this case, I did the dark iron paint that the fuselage darker areas is. And then take a clear glue. So I used Elmer's glue, which we have over here in the States. And I just put a little drop on the top, and that kind of gives you a lens. And that's roughly how the actual missile should look, right? There's going to be a seeker head in there with an IR sensor of some kind. So that's just a nice little way to get some extra detail. As we continue to work this, I'm going to take a couple minutes here and talk about where we're going next. So I did promise a kind of a reveal for what aircraft is coming after the MiG-29, since we're close to finishing it. I'm going to be building, excuse me, my throat's getting a little dry. This is getting a little tough to continue. I am building 2 1/48 scale B-17s. One of them is an F model. One of them is a G model. The F model is a Revell kit. The G model is an HKM kit. They are very different in quality. They are very different in price. And that's actually going to be some commentary in one of the first episodes. Probably the first episode, which, again, spoiler alert, is already filmed. So I just need to put that together, and as soon as the MiG is completed, we'll get that out. So there's going to be some commentary there about the cost of the models versus the detail versus the time investiture to get the same amount of quality out of a cheaper model as a more expensive model, and really, to show that you can achieve the same level of detail from the cheaper model if you're willing to put the time in. This is also a big challenge for me, because it means that I have to practice some techniques that I'm not, very proficient in at this point in time, in order to be able to put this model together the way I want it. And so it is going to be a big job for me, or not a big job, but it's going to be a big project for me. It's likely going to take a considerable amount of time. I'm predicting this will probably, these two aircraft will probably carry us through most of the rest of this calendar year, realistically speaking. And that's, I will try to be consistent with updates. I'm getting a huge head start with how much work I've been putting into the MiG in the last couple of days. So I've got a number of video head start here that I have built up a kind of a nice investment in time. And so my aim is to be absolutely consistent moving through the B-17 project. There's also going to be some pretty cool additions to those kits. You'll see when we get there. Back to the MiG though. Here we are putting on the actual flat clear coat. Again, the flat clear coat is just to knock down the reflectiveness and the glossiness from the gloss finish, or the gloss coat that was on previously. This aircraft's not shiny in real life. A lot of military fighters are not shiny. And so we need that flat coat to bring it more back to how it actually looks in real life. The flat clear also does give us protection for, again, it further protects the decals. It also now protects and seals in the weathering effects that we've done, or I've done here. I'm still trying to get away from using the Royal We. It is a work in progress and one of my little speech tics. But at no point did I ever think I would be sitting here for 34 minutes doing just a straight monologue. So clear coat obviously is a bit tricky to film. It's very hard to see where the spray is actually being applied, particularly when you're watching this at 2x speed. But it's also very difficult to see when you're doing it. And so you'll notice me maybe going over several areas a couple of times. Mostly that's because I just can't see where the clear coat's landing. This is all light placement. If you're doing clear coat, be careful where your lights are. It's good to have a couple of angles of lights. But the flat clear really does give us back our overall finish of the kit that we're really going for on the paint scheme. I went ahead and weathered the missiles. I did think about this, unfortunately we're in a position where these aircraft are actually firing their missiles, pretty frequently at this point, so it's up to you. I decided I wanted to reflect a bit more along the lines of a time where maybe they weren't firing their missiles as frequently. So I went ahead and I did weather the missiles, and that's something I'd never really done before. Adding more detail to the stores is something that I would really like to work on as another one of my goals to do as well. So where we go from here, part 8 is going to be the final assembly and essentially the full reveal of the finished aircraft as it is currently sitting, as soon as I put that little piece of landing gear link in. So that'll be part 8. Part 9, I'll probably do a start to finish build summary without me talking. There'll be music or something in the background, and it'll just show the aircraft being fully constructed. And then I may do a part 10 as like a review of the kit, just to give it its its due day, or its day in court rather, and the due diligence, and that'll be it. Don't forget to like and subscribe if that's your kind of thing. Feel free to comment, and thank you all so much for watching.